Liara had always known she was different from the other elves in the Crystal Kingdom. While they spent their days in marble halls studying ancient magic and perfecting spells that had not changed in 10,000 years, she found herself drawn to the wild places beyond the great forest. She preferred the sound of wind through mountain valleys to the carefully composed music of the elven orchestras. She preferred solitude to the endless court gatherings where the same conversations repeated endlessly. The day she found the dragons was the day everything changed for her. She had been exploring the deep canyons in the northern reaches of her world when the meteorite fell from the sky. It came down with a sound like thunder and flame, crashing into the earth with such force that the ground shook beneath her feet. She watched as fire and smoke rose up from the impact site, and without thinking about the danger, she ran toward it. What she found in the crater stopped her heart. Two small creatures lay among the burning rocks, their bodies covered in cuts and their eyes glazed with pain. They were dragons, but not like any dragon from the old stories. These dragons had skin that seemed to shimmer between different colors, and their eyes held intelligence and fear in equal measure. They were no more than 3 feet long, their wings folded against their bodies like broken promises. Liara knew that dragons were supposed to be enemies. The elven texts spoke of dragons as harbingers of destruction, creatures that could not be trusted and could not be reasoned with. Every elf child grew up hearing stories of how dragons had once tried to conquer their world, and how the ancient elven mages had defeated them and driven them to extinction. But when Liara looked into the eyes of these two creatures, she saw only pain and confusion and a desperate hope that someone would help them. She spent the next hours carefully moving them away from the burning meteorite. She used her own clothing to wrap their wounds and carried them to a hidden spring deep in the canyon, where the water had healing properties. She did not know if they would live. She did not know if they would be grateful, or if they would attack her the moment they gained strength. But she stayed with them through that first night, sitting beside them as they struggled to breathe. By morning, the larger dragon had opened its eyes. Liara named it Flame because its scales reminded her of copper fire in the sunlight. The smaller one, which she would call Ash, took another full day to regain consciousness. Both of them were weak and injured, and Liara made the decision that would change her entire life. She would keep them. She would hide them from her own people and raise them in secret. For months, she brought them food from her own stores. She stole healing herbs from the royal gardens and created poultices to treat their wounds. Slowly, their injuries healed. Their eyes began to shine with life again, and most remarkably, they began to show affection toward her. Flame would rest its massive head on her lap while she sat in the quiet cave she had found for them. Ash would follow her everywhere, making soft chirping sounds that Liara came to understand were expressions of happiness and trust. Years passed this way. Liara built a small dwelling in the hidden valley where she kept her dragons. She created false stories to explain her absences to the Elven Council. She claimed she was studying the old magic in the ancient forests. She claimed she was meditating in the spiritual groves. No one questioned her because Liara was known as a quiet, serious scholar who kept to herself. No one paid attention to what she did or where she spent her time. The dragons grew to their full size. Flame became enormous with a wingspan that stretched 30 feet when fully extended. Its scales burned with colors that seemed to shift and change in different light. Ash remained smaller but moved with a grace that made Liara think of dancers. Together, they were the most beautiful creatures Liara had ever seen, and they were hers in a way that she belonged to them as well. She taught them to trust humans, even though they had never known any kind humans. She taught them to speak through a combination of gestures and sounds. She taught them about loyalty and love and what it meant to have a family, and they taught her things in return. They taught her that the rigid rules of the elven society were not laws written by the universe but merely choices made by beings who could choose differently. They taught her that the boundaries she had always assumed were permanent could be crossed. On the morning that would change everything, Liara was sitting by the waterfall in her hidden valley when she felt something different in the air. The sky seemed heavier somehow, and the birds had stopped singing. She had learned to trust these instincts over the years. Something was coming. Something that would alter the careful balance she had maintained for so long. Flame lifted her massive head and made a sound of alarm. Ash moved closer to Liara, pressing her body against her legs in a way that showed worry and protection. The two dragons had sensed it too. Something new was coming to their world. The arrival was not dramatic. A small vessel descended through the clouds. its metal hull reflecting the light of the sun. It moved slowly, and Liara could see that it was damaged. Smoke trailed from one side of the craft, and the landing was rough and uncontrolled. The vessel crashed into the northern forest with a sound of breaking trees and tearing metal. Liara knew immediately that this was no natural occurrence. This was technology, and it was not from her world. The humans had finally found them. After thousands of years of isolation, the moment of contact had arrived. She should have been afraid. She should have run to the Elven Council and reported what she had seen. She should have helped them prepare for what they would view as an invasion. But Liara had spent enough years with her dragons to understand that fear and misunderstanding were the roots of all conflict. She wanted to know who was inside that vessel. She wanted to know if they came as conquerors or as explorers. She rode on Flame's back as they flew toward the crash site. Ash followed beside them, her wings beating in steady rhythm. They arrived at the vessel just as the sun was beginning to set. The craft lay on its side, partially buried under fallen trees. A hatch was open on its side, and smoke was still rising from the interior. Liara climbed down from Flame and approached cautiously. She called out in the common tongue of humans, a language that the ancient elven texts had preserved but which no elf had spoken in generations. Her words felt strange on her tongue, but they came out clearly enough. She asked if anyone inside was alive and if they needed help. A figure emerged from the hatch. It was a human, and it was injured. Liara could see blood on his uniform and a deep cut along his face. He stumbled down from the vessel and fell to his knees in the soft earth. When he looked up and saw Liara standing there with two massive dragons beside her, his eyes went wide with shock. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The human stared at Liara and the dragons. Liara stared back at the human, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was tall, and his skin was darker than the pale elves, and his eyes held a mixture of fear and curiosity and wonder. In that moment of mutual observation, something shifted between them. It was not friendship yet, and it was not trust, but it was the beginning of something that neither of them could have predicted. Liara made a decision in that moment. She decided that this human was not her enemy, at least not yet. She decided that she would help him and bring him to safety, and she decided that whatever came next would be something completely new for both their worlds. She helped the injured human to his feet and guided him toward Flame, gesturing for him to climb onto the dragon's back. The human hesitated for only a moment before doing as she indicated. As they rose into the sky, leaving the crashed vessel behind, Liara knew that her life as she had known it was ending. A new chapter was beginning, one that would write itself in ways she could not control or predict. The dragons flew steadily toward the hidden valley, carrying Liara and the human stranger toward a meeting between worlds that would change everything. The human's name was Marcus, and he had traveled farther from home than any explorer before him. He came from a world that Liara could barely imagine, a place of endless cities and machines and billions of people living closely together. He came from a civilization that had mastered the stars and sent explorers to seek out new life and new worlds. And he had crashed on the one world that was not supposed to exist. The hidden valley was not what Marcus expected. When he first arrived on Flame's back, his entire body was shaking from pain and shock and the strange feeling of being so high in the air. But when he saw the valley spread out below them as they descended, something changed in his expression. The fear and confusion seemed to fade for a moment, replaced by wonder. Liara had built the dwelling over many years, and it was a beautiful place. The structure was made of white stone that she had shaped using magic, and it rose naturally from the valley floor as if it had grown there instead of being built. Around it, she had created gardens that bloomed with flowers that only grew in this one hidden place. There was a waterfall that fell upward instead of downward, defying the normal laws of nature through old elven magic. There were trees that glowed softly at night and streams that ran with water so clear you could see individual stones on the bottom from 10 feet above. She helped Marcus down from Flame's back and guided him inside the dwelling. His wound was deep and needed attention. She brought him water to drink and cloth to clean the blood from his face. She used herbs and salves from her stores to treat his injuries. He watched her work with the kind of attention that made her think he was trying to understand not just what she was doing, but who she was and why she was helping him. "Why?" Marcus asked when she had finished wrapping the wound. "Why would you save me?" "Your people. They sent me here. They would see me as a threat." Liara sat down across from him and tried to think about how to explain her choices. She thought about the dragons and the years she had kept them secret. She thought about the rigid rules of the elven society and how she had broken every one of them. She thought about what it meant to choose compassion when the world told you to choose fear. "I did not know if you were a threat," she said carefully. "I knew only that you were hurt and alone. I know what it feels like to be something that my people fear. I raised those dragons you rode in on. To my people, they are monsters. To me, they are family. So when I saw someone new and different and hurt, I chose to help instead of fear." Marcus listened to her words and seemed to understand something deeper in them. He asked her questions about her world and her people and her life. She answered him honestly because something about this human made her want to be truthful with him. She told him about the Crystal Kingdom and the Elven Council, and the 10,000 years of isolation. She told him about the laws that no one questioned, and the traditions that had never been changed. Over the next 3 days, Marcus recovered in the hidden valley. Liara brought him food from her stores and water from the springs. She showed him the library she had created in the hollow of the ancient tree, where she had gathered books and scrolls from across the elven world. She showed him the way the magic flowed through the valley at night, creating patterns of light that danced across the stone walls. Most importantly, she introduced him to Flame and Ash properly. The dragons seemed to know that Marcus was not a threat. Ash approached him with curiosity and let him touch her scales. Flame made a sound like a purring cat, but deeper and more powerful. The human and the dragons formed a connection that surprised even Liara, with how quickly it happened. She watched as Marcus sat with them and stroked their scales and seemed to find comfort in their presence just as Liara did. "Your people will know about me soon," Marcus said on the 3rd day. "My vessel sent a signal when I landed. I told them I made peaceful contact. They will be searching for me. And when they find my crash site, your people will know that someone foreign has arrived on their world." Liara had been trying not to think about this truth. She had been pushing away the knowledge that the careful balance of her life was about to be destroyed. The Elven Council would send warriors to investigate. The human explorers would arrive with their technology and their questions. Everything would change. "What happens then?" she asked him. Marcus looked out across the valley toward the distant mountains where the elven cities glowed softly in the evening light. He seemed to be making a decision about something important. When he turned back to look at Liara, she could see that he had chosen a path. "Then we decide who we are," he said. "You can hide me here and keep your secret and nothing changes. Or you can walk with me to meet your people and show them that humans and elves can coexist. You can show them that understanding is possible. I know what your people might do. I know they might be afraid. But I also know that you are brave enough to face that fear, because you have already done it with your dragons." Liara walked out of the dwelling and stood at the valley's edge. She could feel the presence of the Elven Kingdom in her bones. She could sense the council chambers where decisions were made and the warrior temples where soldiers trained. She could sense the fear that would grip her people when they learned that the world was not theirs alone anymore. She could also sense Flame and Ash nearby. She could feel their trust in her. She could remember every moment of raising them and every time they had shown her that the fears her people had taught her were based on misunderstanding rather than truth. "Tomorrow we will go to my people," Liara said when she returned to Marcus. "Tomorrow we will tell them that a human has come peacefully to our world. Tomorrow we will ask them to choose differently than they have chosen before." Marcus stood and thanked her, but Liara held up a hand to stop him. She did not want his gratitude. She wanted his partnership and his presence as they faced what was coming. She wanted to show her people that change was possible, and that the universe was larger and more beautiful than they had ever allowed themselves to imagine. That night, they sat together under the stars with Flame and Ash curled around them. Liara told Marcus about the history of her people and the isolation they had chosen. Marcus told her about the human worlds and the long journey that had led him to this moment. They talked until the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn. As the sun rose over the mountains, Liara stood and looked at the human who had crashed into her life and changed its direction so completely. She thought about how quickly fate could shift the course of someone's existence. She thought about how a single choice to help instead of harm could ripple outward and affect worlds. "Are you ready?" she asked Marcus. "No," he said, "but I am willing, and I think that is what courage means." Together they walked toward the edge of the valley, Flame and ash came with them, and as they moved toward the waiting elven kingdom, Liara felt something that she had never felt before. She felt hope. She felt the possibility that her people could be different. She felt the certainty that whatever happened next would become the story that would be told for generations to come. The approach to the elven city was something that Liara had not done in many years. She had purposely stayed away from the great crystal towers and the marble plazas where the council held their sessions. She had preferred the wild spaces and the hidden valleys where no one asked questions about her choices. Now, as she walked toward those same towers with a human at her side and 2 dragons following behind her, she understood that she could never truly hide who she was anymore. Marcus walked beside her with his head held high, even though she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his eyes kept moving as he tried to understand everything around him. He had never seen an elven city before. He had never seen architecture that seemed to grow naturally from the earth instead of being built upon it. He had never witnessed magic woven into the very fabric of the environment. The buildings of the Crystal Kingdom were truly magnificent. They rose in spiraling towers that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Walkways connected them at impossible angles. Water fountains flowed upward into the air and hung suspended before falling back down again. The entire city seemed to be alive with magic, and every elf who walked through the streets had been born into this splendor and had learned to take it for granted. But now, as Liara walked through those streets with Marcus, she began to see her own world through his eyes. She saw the beauty in things she had stopped noticing. She saw the wonder in the way the light filtered through the crystal buildings and created colors that had no names. She saw the impossible grace of elves moving through their city with centuries of perfected movement. Word spread quickly. The elves who saw them walking toward the central plaza stopped and stared. An elf with dragons was strange enough, but an elf walking openly with a human was something no one had expected to see. Whispers moved through the crowds. Some elves looked frightened. Others looked angry. A few looked curious. By the time they reached the central plaza, a crowd had gathered. Guards in armor that seemed to be made of solidified moonlight moved toward them with their weapons drawn, but they stopped when they saw Flame and Ash. The dragons had a presence that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Even though these guards had been trained to fight almost anything, they hesitated when faced with creatures so large and powerful. The council chamber doors opened, and Liara felt her heart begin to race. She knew what would happen next. The Elven Council would demand answers. They would want to know about the human. They would want to know about the dragons. They would want to know about her choices and her loyalties. But before any of that could happen, Marcus stepped forward. He moved slowly and carefully, keeping his hands visible and open to show he carried no weapons. He began to speak, and his words were in the old elven tongue that Liara had taught him. "I come from the human worlds," he said, his accent making each word sound like a song. "I come with peace in my heart and respect for your people. I crashed on your world by accident, but I have learned that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come through accidents. I have been helped by one of your people, and I have learned that elves are not so different from humans. We all want safety for our families. We all want to build something that will last. We all want to be understood." The council chamber doors opened wider, and the members of the council walked out into the plaza. There were 12 of them, and they had each lived for thousands of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had made decisions that shaped the history of their world. And now they looked at Marcus and Liara and the dragons with expressions that were difficult to read. The one who stepped forward first was the High Council leader, a being named Elanthera, who had seen more than any of the other council members. She was ancient even by elven standards, and her eyes held the weight of all those centuries of decisions and choices. She looked at Liara first, and Liara could see recognition and disappointment in that gaze. "Liara," Elanthera said, and her voice was not angry but sad. "We have known for years that you kept secrets. We chose not to interfere because you are a scholar and we respected your need for privacy. But this goes far beyond privacy. You have hidden dragons from us. You have hidden knowledge of a human civilization. You have brought a foreigner into our world without our permission." Liara stepped forward. She had prepared for this moment for days, but now that it was here, she found herself struggling to find the right words. She thought about everything that had brought her to this place. She thought about the tiny dragons she had found in that crater. She thought about the choice to love something that her people had taught her to fear. She thought about the moment she first saw Marcus and decided that understanding was possible. "I did these things," Liara said clearly. "I am responsible for every choice I have made. But I did not break your laws to hurt our people. I did these things because I believed that there was a better way than the way we have always lived. I believed that fear was not the same as truth. I believed that we could choose differently." She turned to look at the gathered crowd of elves who had come to watch this meeting. She wanted them to hear her words. She wanted them to understand what she had learned. "For 10,000 years we have lived alone on this world," Liara continued. "We told ourselves that we were better than other beings. We told ourselves that other creatures were threats. We built our society on the belief that isolation was safety. But I have learned that isolation is also loneliness. I have learned that when you know someone, when you truly know them and understand them, you cannot hate them anymore. These dragons were supposed to be monsters, but they are the most loyal and loving creatures I have ever known. And this human was supposed to be an invader, but he is a person like us with hopes and fears and the desire to belong somewhere." The crowd was silent. The council members were silent. Even Elanthera seemed to be thinking carefully about what she had heard. It was Marcus who spoke next. He stepped closer to the council and made a gesture of respect that he had learned from Liara. He bowed in the way that elves bowed to those they honored. "Your people have built something magnificent here," he said. "I can see that in every building and every spell and every choice you have made. But magnificence that is kept hidden from the rest of the universe is magnificence that no one can share or learn from. I believe that humans and elves have much to teach each other. I believe that two civilizations together are stronger than either one alone. And I believe that Liara was brave to show me kindness when she could have shown me fear." Elanthera was quiet for a long time. Then she made a gesture and the guards lowered their weapons. The High Council leader looked at Liara and Marcus and the two dragons standing behind them. Then she looked at her fellow council members. "We will convene the full council to discuss this matter," Elanthera said. "We will determine what contact with the human world should look like. We will decide how to proceed. But I want it known that Liara's actions, whatever their consequences, were actions taken in pursuit of peace rather than war. That is a choice we should never punish." As the crowd began to disperse and the council members returned to their chamber, Liara felt something shift inside her. She had expected to be cast out. She had expected to be seen as a traitor. But instead she had been heard. Her words had mattered. And more than that, Marcus had stood beside her and spoken his own truth. That night, as the elven city slowly adjusted to the knowledge that humans existed, and that contact with them was now inevitable, Liara stood on a high platform with Marcus and the dragons. They looked out at the glowing towers and the peaceful streets of the Crystal Kingdom. "What happens now?" Marcus asked her. "Now," Liara said, "we build a bridge between worlds. We show that understanding is possible. We prove that the future does not have to repeat the past." And as they stood together in the starlight with Flame and Ash resting at their feet, both Liara and Marcus understood that they had already changed the course of history simply by choosing to be kind to a stranger. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity that neither Liara nor Marcus had fully anticipated. The Elven Council convened daily to discuss the implications of human contact. They sent delegations to examine the crashed human vessel and to understand the technology that Marcus carried with him. They began to ask difficult questions about what the future might hold for their relationship with the human worlds. But more importantly, they began to listen to Liara and Marcus. They began to understand that the humans were not monsters or conquerors but explorers, and people who were just as capable of peace as the elves were. The two of them were invited to give presentations to the council about their worlds and their cultures, and the possibilities that contact could bring. Marcus demonstrated the capabilities of human technology. He showed them medical equipment that could heal injuries in ways that even elven magic had never thought to attempt. He showed them communication devices that could send messages across vast distances instantly. He showed them machines that could generate clean energy and transport goods safely. The elves were amazed and frightened in equal measure. They began to understand that they had not been the most advanced civilization in the universe, as they had always believed. Liara, for her part, became the bridge between the two worlds. She taught Marcus more about elven culture and history. She introduced him to the most brilliant minds of the Crystal Kingdom. She helped him understand that beneath the rigid structure of elven society, there were individuals who were open to change and willing to embrace new possibilities. She became a symbol of what could happen when beings from different worlds chose to understand each other, rather than fear each other. The dragons played an unexpected role in all of this as well. Flame and Ash were allowed to enter the city now, and they became living proof that beings that the elves had been taught to fear could actually be sources of wonder and connection. Children came to see them. Scholars wanted to study them. Artists wanted to paint them. The dragons, in their own way, were teaching the elves that the world was larger and more complex than they had ever been told. One evening, as Liara and Marcus sat on the platform overlooking the city, the High Council leader Elanthera came to speak with them. She walked slowly, and Liara could sense that she was carrying the weight of important decisions. "We have made our choice," Elanthera said. "The Council has voted. We are prepared to enter into formal diplomatic relations with the human worlds. We will open trade routes. We will share knowledge. We will begin the process of building a real relationship between our civilizations." But this was not an easy choice for us. Liara listened carefully. She could hear the hesitation in Elanthera's voice. "Many of our people are afraid," Elanthera continued. "We have been isolated for so long that change feels dangerous. There are some who believe that this contact will destroy our culture and our way of life. We are going to need leaders who can help our people move through this fear. We need people who understand both worlds and who can help us navigate this new relationship." She looked directly at Liara. "I am asking you to become an ambassador between our worlds. I am asking you to leave the Hidden Valley and take on a role in helping our people adjust to this new reality. Will you do this?" Liara felt Marcus tense slightly beside her. She knew what he was thinking. If she accepted this role, she would be leaving the quiet life she had built. She would be stepping fully into the public world. She would no longer be able to retreat from the judgments and expectations of her people. She would be responsible for representing not just herself but everyone who believed that peace was possible. But she also knew that this was why everything had happened. This was why she had found the dragons. This was why Marcus had crashed on her world. This was the moment that all the pieces had been moving toward. "I will do this," Liara said. "But I have one condition." Elanthera raised an eyebrow. It was unusual for anyone to place conditions on what the High Council asked of them. "Marcus and Flame and Ash will be part of this work," Liara said. "We cannot pretend that this is something I did alone. The human and the dragons are part of this story. If I am to be an ambassador, they must be ambassadors as well." Elanthera was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "That is acceptable. In fact, it is wise. You are correct that the three of you represent something powerful together. You represent the possibility of connection. You represent the idea that different beings can learn from each other and grow together." Over the following months, Liara, Marcus, and the dragons traveled between the human worlds and the Elven Kingdom. They attended meetings where they explained the cultures and values of each civilization. They answered questions and addressed fears. They showed that peace was not just a dream but a practical possibility. It was not always easy. There were humans who did not trust the elves. There were elves who did not trust the humans. There were political complications and misunderstandings and moments when everything seemed like it might fall apart. But through all of it, Liara and Marcus stood firm in their commitment to the path they had chosen. One day, nearly a year after Marcus had first crashed on the elven world, he and Liara stood in the great hall of the council chamber. Around them were representatives from both human worlds and the Elven Kingdom. They were signing the first formal treaty between their civilizations. It outlined trade agreements and cultural exchanges and commitments to peaceful coexistence. As Marcus signed his name on the ancient parchment, he thought about the moment when Liara had first saved him. He thought about how quickly his entire understanding of the universe had changed. He thought about the fear and the wonder and the terrible beauty of everything that had happened. Flame and Ash were present in the chamber as well, standing in positions of honor. They had become symbols of the impossible things that could be achieved when beings chose to work together instead of against each other. When the signing was complete, the entire assembly stood and made gestures of respect and honor. The hall filled with music and light and the sound of celebration, but Liara felt quiet inside, even though the moment was joyful. That night she walked with Marcus to a balcony that overlooked both the elven city and the lands beyond. She could see in the distance the place where the human settlement was being built, a place where humans and elves would live and work together. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked her. "Saving me that day. Everything that has come from that choice has changed your entire life." Liara thought about the question carefully. She thought about the years she had spent in hiding with her dragons. She thought about the fear of discovery that had always been with her. She thought about the isolation she had chosen rather than being cast out for her choices. "No," she said finally, "I do not regret it. I spent so long believing that the only way to be safe was to hide who I really was. But saving you showed me that being true to yourself and helping others is stronger than any protection hiding could ever provide. You helped me understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite the fear." Marcus took her hand. In that moment, under the stars of a world that belonged to both their peoples now, they understood that what had begun as an accident had become the greatest adventure of their lives. They had helped to change the course of history, not through weapons or conquest, but through kindness and understanding, and the willingness to see the humanity in someone different from themselves. 5 years had passed since Marcus first crashed on the elven world, and the settlement where humans and elves lived together had grown far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The city that had been built in the lands between the human worlds and the Crystal Kingdom had become a symbol of what was possible when different beings chose cooperation over conflict. Liara walked through the streets of this shared city with a sense of pride and peace that she had never known before. The buildings reflected both human engineering and elven magic, creating architecture that was both practical and beautiful. In the markets, humans and elves worked side by side, trading goods and knowledge and stories. Children of both species played together, learning languages and customs and games from each other. The settlement had been named Unity by agreement between the two peoples. It was not an elven name and it was not a human name, but something that belonged to both of them. The city had schools where human and elven children learned together. It had hospitals where human doctors and elven healers worked alongside each other, combining their knowledge to create treatments that neither species could have developed alone. It had libraries where the histories of both worlds were preserved and studied. Flame and ash had become even more important than anyone could have predicted. They had helped to train human pilots in how to work with dragons for transport and exploration. They had participated in rescue missions where their strength and intelligence had saved countless lives. They had become ambassadors in their own right, teaching both species that beings could be both powerful and compassionate at the same time. Marcus had taken on the role of the lead ambassador from the human worlds. He worked with the Elven Council to navigate the complications that arose as two very different civilizations tried to learn to live together. There were misunderstandings. There were moments when cultural differences created conflict, but Marcus approached each challenge with patience and the belief that every problem could be solved if both sides were willing to listen and try to understand. Liara had become the chief architect of the Human and Elven Relations program. She had designed the curriculum for the schools. She had helped to create the frameworks through which the two peoples could share knowledge and learn from each other. She had become a symbol of the possibility of change and growth. One day, a young human named Riley came to speak with Liara. Riley had been born after the contact between the worlds began. She had grown up with elven friends and had learned the elven language as naturally as she learned her own human language. She wanted to become a scholar of comparative cultures, studying both human and elven civilization. "I want to know everything," Riley said with the kind of enthusiasm that only young people could manage. "I want to understand why humans and elves developed so differently. I want to know what we can learn from each other. I want to write about this time when everything changed." Liara smiled at the young human. She thought about how the world had changed even in just 5 years. Young people like Riley saw humans and elves as a natural part of the world. They could not imagine a time when the two species had not known each other. They could not understand the fear that the older generation still sometimes carried. "That is important work," Liara said to Riley. "But there is something you should know. The most important thing to understand about history is that it is shaped by individuals making choices. You can study all the facts and dates and statistics you want, but unless you understand the people who made those choices and why they made them, you will never truly understand what happened." Riley looked puzzled, so Liara began to tell her the whole story. She told her about finding the dragons in the crater and the choice to save them instead of reporting them. She told her about Marcus crashing and the decision to help him instead of turning him over to the authorities. She told her about the moment when she walked toward her own people with a human at her side and chose to speak truth instead of hide. As Liara told the story, other people began to gather. Older elves who remembered the time before contact, humans who had been part of the first diplomatic missions. Even Flame and Ash came and lay down to listen as if they too understood that this story was important and needed to be remembered and shared. Every big change in history starts with people making small, brave choices, Liara told Riley and everyone else who was listening. It starts with someone deciding to help instead of harm. It starts with someone choosing to listen instead of assume. It starts with someone being willing to look foolish or get hurt, or lose everything because they believe something better is possible. Marcus came to stand beside Liara as she spoke. He took her hand, and she could feel the strength and steadiness of his presence. They had been through so much together. They had faced doubt and fear and opposition, but they had never given up on the belief that peace was possible. The dragons taught me something important too, Liara continued, looking at Flame and Ash. They taught me that beings that everyone else had given up on could be loyal and loving and valuable. We had decided as a species that dragons could not be trusted. But when I met them without those prejudices, when I looked at them as individuals rather than as a category of things to fear, everything changed. The story spread through Unity and then through both the human worlds and the Crystal Kingdom. Young people like Riley wrote it down and studied it. Historians examined it and debated it, but the core truth remained the same. Two individuals had chosen courage and compassion, and that choice had changed everything. Years continued to pass. Liara and Marcus grew older together. They watched as the settlement of Unity grew into a thriving metropolis where humans and elves lived and worked as equals. They watched as the second generation of hybrid settlements was established in different regions. They watched as trade and knowledge sharing became so normal that younger beings could barely remember a time when the two species had been separate. Flame and Ash lived longer than anyone expected, their lifespans extended by the magic of the elven world and the care that Liara had given them their entire lives. They had offspring, and those offspring became the first dragons to truly know both humans and elves as family. They became the living bridge between all three species. When Liara finally stood at the edge of her old hidden valley many years later, she barely recognized the place. The vegetation had grown wild over her abandoned dwelling. The waterfall still flowed upward, defying gravity with ancient magic. But the sanctuary that had once been her secret refuge had been returned to nature. Marcus came to stand beside her. He was older now too, his hair touched with gray, but his eyes still held that same curiosity and wonder that she had seen the first time she met him. "Do you miss it?" he asked her. "The hiding, the solitude?" Liara thought about the question. She thought about the years she had spent alone with her dragons, afraid of her own people, afraid of what would happen if anyone discovered what she had done. She thought about the peace of those years, but also about the loneliness. "No," she said, "I do not miss hiding who I was. I do not miss the fear. But I am grateful for those years because they taught me who I really was. They taught me that I was braver than I knew. They taught me that love matters more than fear." She turned to look at Marcus. "I am glad that you crashed here. I am glad that I was brave enough to help you. I am glad that we chose to build something together instead of hiding apart." As the sun set over the hidden valley, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible, Liara and Marcus stood together and reflected on the impossible journey they had taken. Two individuals, one elf and one human, with two dragons who defied everyone's expectations, had changed the course of history. The future that unfolded from their choices was not perfect. There were still challenges and conflicts and moments of misunderstanding between the human and elven worlds. But there was also peace. There was also cooperation. There was also the constant possibility of growth and learning and becoming something better than what came before. And it had all begun with a single choice, made in the moment when Liara decided to help a stranger instead of fear him. That one choice, multiplied by the choices of countless others who chose kindness and understanding, had transformed everything. It had proven that one person, acting with courage and compassion, could change the world. It had shown that the most powerful force in the universe was not weapons or magic or technology, but the simple, human and elven capacity to choose peace and to choose to see the best in those who were different from themselves.